tissues and cells. So we are going to talk about how plant tissues work and what kind of cells are present in this plant tissue. We have several cells that are doing the same work. We call them as tissues. So plants have only 3 tissue types. So we have the first one, the dermal tissue, number 2, ground tissue, and number 3, the vascular tissue. So let's have the first type of tissue, the dermal tissue. So the dermal tissue covers the outer surface of herbaceous plants. Dermal tissue is composed of epidermal cells, closely packed cells, and secrete a waxy cuticle that aids in the prevention of water loss. So I am going to show you a picture of a herbaceous plant. So this is an example of a herbaceous plant. Okay? So yung nasa labas niyang herbaceous plant na yan, it is composed of dermal tissue, specifically called your epidermal cells. Parang sa tao lang din, di ba? We have what we call as the outer layer of our skin, the epidermis. So sa ating mga halaman naman, they have the epidermal cells or the dermal tissue. Okay? So, yan, dermal tissue natin na yan, they secrete a waxy cuticle that aids in the prevention of water loss. So, mapapansin natin doon sa mga halaman yung parang may wax yung labas ng ng stem nila, ng dahon nila. Ayan. So, bakit may ganon? Bakit may wax? Karaniwan yung ating mga labas ng halaman natin. It is in order to prevent water loss. Kasi alam naman natin na ang halaman, they live with enough water sa katawan nila. So in order to prevent the loss of water, especially through direct sunlight, kunyari nasa direct sunlight sila, to prevent water loss, kailangan nilang merong waxy cuticle. Okay, aside from that, also in the dermal tissue, we have what we call as the guard cells. Siguro narinig na ninyo ito before. So, I'm going to show you what a guard cell looks like. So, ito yan. So, these are bean-shaped cells covering the stomata opening. Ayan. So, yung stomata natin, it's an opening in the dermal tissue of our cells wherein nagkakaroon tayo ng gas exchange. So, anong gas exchange ang nangyayari dito? It's between oxygen and carbon dioxide. And also, pwedeng water vapor. Kaya nga pag umaga, we could have water dripping down from underside of our leaves. Okay, so again, in the dermal tissue, we have 2 cells that are present there, the epidermal cells and then the guard cells. So, epidermal cells, yun yung layer, nasa pinakalabas. And the guard cells are openings, the opening of actually the stomata ng cells natin na kung saan lumalabas at pasok ang oxygen and carbon dioxide natin. And of course, water vapor or excess water, especially during the dawn sa mga halaman natin. So number 2, let's have the ground tissue. It comprises the bulk. So parang halos majority ito ng katawan ng halaman natin. So meron tayong 3 klase ng cells dito. We have the parenchyma, the collenchyma, and then the sclerenchyma. So madali lang i-compare tong 3 mga cells nito na nasa loob ng plant body natin. So ulitin ko kanina, the dermal tissue, it's the outside. Pagpapasok tayo sa loob, you have the ground tissue. So 3 klase ito. The parenchyma cells have thin walls and are found in the dermal, ground, and vascular tissue. So the dermal tissue and then the ground tissue has parenchyma cells. Pag parenchyma cells kasi karaniwan, ito yung mga young na cells natin na hindi tayo, but the plants, these are the young cells. That's why it's present in the dermal tissue, ground tissue, and of course the vascular tissue. Mamaya makita natin kung ano yung vascular tissue na sinasabi natin. Number 2, we have the collenchyma cells. They have a support function in plants, particularly in young animals. These cells help to support plants while not restraining growth. So, meron pa rin growth na nangyayari just like the parenchyma cells. Yun nga lang, medyo mas nagiging rigid yung cells pagdating sa collenchyma cells. Kaya, ang function nito is for support. So, generally, collenchyma cells are elongated in shape and they have a thick primary cell wall composed of carbohydrates, polymers, cellulose, and pectin. So, yun yung dalawang klase ng carbohydrate polymers na meron sa parenchyma natin. That's why sabi ko nga sa inyo before, doon sa unang discussion natin, the cell wall is composed of our cellulose. At yung bumubuo sa ating cell walls is the parenchyma together with the pectin. So, parenchyma cells are also found in the cortex of stems and along leaf veins. So, papakita ko sa inyo kung ano yung cortex. So, ito yon. So, yan yung cortex na sinasabi natin. And the darker part, those are your parenchyma cells. And then the lighter ones are your parenchyma cells. Third, the sclerenchyma cells. They also serve as support in our plants. But unlike parenchyma cells, they have a hardening agent in their cell wall and are much more rigid. So, kumbaga dito, hindi na mai-stretch yung cell. So, the cells in a sclerenchyma cell have thick secondary cell walls and are non-living ones matured. So, ito na yung tendency na magiging bark na siya. Okay? So, meron tayong dalawang klase ng sclerenchyma cells. We have the sclerates and then the fibers. Again, ano itsura nila? Ito. Ayan. So, sclerenchyma cells, they are quite rigid. Parenchyma, parang half-half. And parenchyma, they are the ones undergoing reproduction and reproduction. Okay, so those are all in our ground tissue. Number 3, the vascular tissue, which is responsible for transporting food, water, hormones, and minerals within the plant. So, parang sa ano lang to, sa tao. Pag sa tao, di ba, we have the vascular system, the circulatory system. So, sa mga halaman, they have their vascular tissue para naman magta-transport ng pagkain, ng water, hormones, and other needs ng halaman natin. So, ano yung dalawang importanteng nandito? We have the xylem and then the phloem. Sabi ko nga sa mga estudyante ko before, it's the XP. Okay? So, xylem are the cells that tends to conduct water. So, always remember that X pairs with water. So, xylem is for water and minerals from the roots to the leaves. And phloem, on the other hand, conduct food. So, PF naman tayo. Phloem is for food. From leaves naman tayo, baliktad, to the rest of the plant. So, yung pag-conduct ng substances sa xylem galing sa roots papunta sa leaves. And for the phloem, it's the other way around. Galing sa dahon where kung saan nangyayari ang ating photosynthesis at doon may pagkain, and then to the rest of the plant. And lastly, we have the cambium. So, it's a lateral meristem that produces xylem cells to one side and phloem cells to the other to form the vascular system. So, let me show you a picture of a cambium together with the xylem and then the phloem. Ayan, mukha siyang, anong tawag dito? Mukha siyang pine cone, di ba? So, dito sa bandang isang side, puro xylem yun, and then sa kabilang side, puro naman phloem. So, hindi sila magkatapat para hindi magkakaroon ng aberya when it comes to the transport of food and water. So, kung food ang dadaan, dito ka lang sa side na to. Kung water, dito ka lang sa side na ito. So, again, xylem is for water and phloem are for your food. Okay. So, just a quick recap. In our plant tissues and cells, meron tayong tatlong klase. The dermal tissue, the ground tissue, and our vascular tissue. So, it's quite simple ang ating plant tissue compared to our animal tissues and cells. So, we have several and much more complex tissues when it comes to animal cells. We have 4 in total. We have the epithelial, the connective, the muscle, and the nervous tissue. So let's have the first one. Epithelial tissue covers body, surfaces, and lines body cavities. So kung kanina i-compare natin sa halaman, ito yung dermal tissue. Dito naman sa ating animal tissues, we have the epithelial tissue. So protection layer natin ito. So it includes the lining. Its function includes lining, protecting, and forming glands. So, marami tayong kailangang protektahan na part ng katawan natin, di ba? The first line of defense would be our skin. And our skin is composed of different epithelial tissue. Okay? And aside from that, we also have glands. So, marami tayong iba't ibang glands na kung saan nagsisecrete ng iba't ibang substances. We have one example, the sweat glands, diba? It secretes sweat. Okay, so yung mga nasa paligid ng glands na yon, they are made up of epithelial tissue. So we have 1, 2, 3 types of epithelial tissue. The first one is the squamous, the second one is cuboidal, and the third one is columnar. So when we say squamous, I'll show you a picture. This one, so it's flattened, that allows the movement of materials and nutrients through the cells. That is passive diffusion. Okay, so pag sinabi natin squamous epithelium, flat yung mga cells natin para mabilis makalabas at makapasok yung ating mga nutrients na kailangan sa loob at labas ng cell. So, paano naglalabas-pasok? It's through passive diffusion. So, it's just a movement from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. Okay, number 2, we have the cuboidal epithelium. It is cube in shape. Oh, yan, ang itsura niya. Located in our pancreas and kidney tubules. So what do? They help in the absorption of nutrients as well as secretion of hormones, sweat, wax, digestive systems, and even milk. So may kita natin yung cuboidal epithelium na yan. So it's also for absorption. Okay, so cuboidal for absorption, for squamous epithelium, it's for the movement of materials through and through our cells. And the last one, we have the columnar. So, ito naman. So, kanina cube ang shape, ngayon naman columnar. So, mas mataas yung height niya. It has elongated cells. The function of the columnar epithelial cells is for secretion and absorption. So, kanina sa cuboidal, it's only for absorption. But this one, columnar, dalawa na. It's not only for absorption, but also for secretion. So, may ina-absorb siya at meron din siyang nilalabas. So, the columnar epithelial cells in the intestine contain microvilli. So, ito yung itsura ng microvilli sa small intestine natin, which helps in increasing the surface or for absorption. So, kung ang intestine natin is about 20 meters, if you're going to have the microvilli na nakapaligid doon sa intestine, nasa loob ng intestine natin, it would make up a not a basketball court, actually a football field, ganun kahaba. So kung iisipin natin na ganun siya kahaba, it only gives one function, and that is to increase the surface area for absorption. At yung microvilli natin na yon, it's composed of columnar epithelium. So bakit kailangan may columnar epithelium yung intestine natin? Para nga po yung mga nutrients na kailangan ng katawan natin ay maa-absorb in our small intestine. So number 2, we have the connective tissue. So connective tissue, from the word itself, it connects something, okay? But aside from that, it has other purposes in our body. So including binding, supporting, protecting, forming blood, storing fats, and filling space. So magkakaiba. Okay, but all of these are a function of our connective tissue. The first example of the connective tissue is our bone. Okay, so our bone is the strongest connective tissue with little ground substance, hard matrix of calcium and phosphorus, and specialized bone called osteocytes. So our bones have osteocytes in them para makapag-produce ng more bone cells. So it provides protection to internal organs and supports the body. So as we all know, our bone, inside it we have the marrows, diba? But we have also bones that protects internal organs, just like your breastbone, diba? Ang breastbone natin, it houses the ribs, the rib cage. It houses your heart, your lungs. Okay, it protects those vital organs of our body. So, yun yung sinasabi natin that the bone is also functioning for protection. Okay, also our skull for our brain. Number 2, connective tissue. The loose connective tissue. We have 3 types of loose connective tissue. When we say loose connective tissue, it's found between many organs, where it acts both to absorb shock and bind tissues together. So, alam naman natin na magkakadikit yung mga laman loob natin. So, in order to prevent yung bombardment in between those organs, we have loose connective tissue in place of that to absorb shock and bind tissue. So it allows water, salts, and various nutrients to diffuse. O ganun ulit kanina, nabanggit natin, from higher concentration through a lower concentration to adjacent or embedded cells and tissues. So loose connective tissues include adipose tissue, areolar tissue, and reticular tissue. So ano yung adipose tissue? So mostly it is made up of fat storage cells called adipocytes. So one good example will be the tissues found in the breast of women. Okay, so yung breast ng mga women, those are adipose tissue and they are made up of fat. Okay, number 2, the areolar tissue shows little specialization but it contains all the cell types and fibers and is distributed in a random web-like fashion. So it fills the spaces between muscle fibers, surround blood and lymph vessels, and supports organ in the abdominal cavity. So very important itong role ng areolar tissue natin. Katulad na nabanggit ko kanina, it's for shock absorber. And the third one is the reticular tissue. It is a mesh-like supportive framework for soft organs such as lymphatic tissue, the spleen, and then the liver. So reticular cells produce the reticular fibers that form the network onto which other cells attach. So, tignan natin ito. Yan yung reticular tissue na sinasabi natin, present in soft organs, just like your liver. So the next one after the bone and loose connective tissue is our blood. Yes, our blood is an example of a connective tissue. Parang hindi naman, ma'am. But actually it is. So blood is a connective tissue of cells separated by a liquid matrix called our plasma. So meron tayong, bakit ang blood is connective tissue, guys? So actually blood is a connective tissue because it connects all the body parts to another body part. So bakit? Because blood circulates all throughout our body. So somehow it connects the whole body to the rest of it. We have the red blood cells and then the white blood cells. So when we say red blood cells, always keep in mind that these are the erythrocytes carrying oxygen. So ito yung mga mukhang donut na kulay red. And then of course, the white blood cells na iba't iba naman ang kanilang mga form, known as the leukocytes, functioning naman for our immune system. Kaya nga, di ba, kapag may sakit kayo or ilalagnat kayo, may infection, normally, your white blood cell count normally goes up. Kasi, ibig sabihin, lumalaban yung katawan ninyo. On the other hand, we also have the plasma, transporting dissolved glucose, sugar, waste, carbon dioxide, and hormones, as well as regulating the water balance for the blood cells. So mainly our blood is composed of 90% water. Okay, so yun yung nasa plasma natin. And lastly, we have the platelets. So platelets, alam ng lahat ito kapag yung may dengue kayo, di ba? Bumababa ang platelet count niyo. So the platelets are the ones responsible for blood clotting. Kaya hindi maganda na bumababa ang platelet. Kaya may mga namamatay sa dengue. Because when your platelet goes down, yung blood clotting capability ng cells natin nadadowngrade yun, which is hindi maganda sa katawan natin. So number 3, the second to the last one type of animal tissue, the muscle tissue or the muscular tissue. So what happens, or what is the function of our muscular tissue? So it's for the movement of our body by contraction of individual muscle cells referred to as muscle fibers. Ayan. So para makagalaw yung katawan natin, it could either be voluntarily na magagalaw natin or kusang gumagalaw, diba? So we have 3 types of muscle tissue, yung walang kamatayang skeletal, smooth, and cardiac muscle tissues. Okay, so pag sinabi nating skeletal, so andun na, from the word itself, those are muscle tissues attached to our skeleton. They have alternating bands perpendicular to the long axis of the cell. So they function in conjunction with the skeletal system for voluntary muscle movement. So ibig sabihin, consciously nakokontrol mo itong mga skeletal muscle fibers na ito. On the other hand, smooth muscle fibers At cardiac muscle fibers, hindi mo naman nakokontrol. They are involuntary. So, involuntary movements such as autonomic responses katulad ng breathing, ng secretion, ejaculation, birth, and certain reflexes. Those are under your smooth muscle fibers. So, these fibers are composed of structures in the digestive system, diba? Hindi mo naman napapagalaw yung intestine mo, diba? Yung stomach mo, yung esophagus mo, napapagalaw mo ba? No. Also, your reproductive tract, diba? Hindi mo naman napapagalaw yan. And of course, your blood vessels. All of those are composed of smooth muscle fibers, which are involuntary moving. And the last one, the special kind of muscle tissue, our cardiac muscle tissue. So again, this is very much different with your skeletal and smooth muscle because they are combined. Okay? So the cardiac muscle fiber is involuntary. Okay? But unlike the smooth muscle fibers, it does not stop. It stops only if you are going to die. So the cell has a bifurcated or fork shape, usually with the nucleus near the center of the cell. It's quite different yung itsura ng muscle tissue ng cardiac muscle fiber. So these cells are usually connected to each other by intercalated discs. The functions of the cells within the heart occur as part of the autonomic nervous system. So this system controls organs like the heart that work involuntarily, which means without active control of the brain. Ayan. So ulitin lang natin, muscle tissue, skeletal, voluntary, smooth and cardiac, involuntary, but cardiac muscle fibers does not stop moving unless you are dead. Okay, let's have the last one. Yay! Nervous tissue functions in the integration of stimulus and control of response to that stimulus. So, nerve cells are called the neurons, which are the building blocks of our nervous tissue. So, each neuron has a cell body, an axon, and many dendrites. So, here's the picture of a neuron. So they maintain homeostasis, the balance of our body. They form myelin and provide support and protection for neurons. Ayan. So yun yung main composition ng nervous tissue natin. So quick recap for our animal tissues and cells. We have 4 cells under this type of tissues under this: epithelial, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. If you have further questions in our topic, guys, you are free to ask me in our GC. Sasagutin po natin hanggat kaya nating sagutin. Okay, for the exercises, it's quite manageable, guys. So again, I am not asking you to immediately submit this to me, but if you have the time to answer and finish all of this, it would be very good and for you to finish more on other subjects. So, iwasang magpetiks-petiks, okay? But then, pero wag din namang so